So, as we're recording this today, the world welcomes the first American Pope. But you'll know we have the first Lutheran Pope when instead of white smoke, you see head from a can of beer come out the top of that chimney.
Is that your tacit acknowledgement that Lutherans have an alcohol problem?
Maybe. Welcome to another episode of Cross Checking. With me again, as always, Pastor Josh Laborious down in somewhere in Texas. It's a big state. Houston-ish. I forget the name of the exact suburb. I'll remember an inconvenient point in time later, unless you want to say something.
Friendswood.
There it is. Yeah, I know it's got wood in the name somewhere. With you, I'm
And
Pastor
everyone
Ben
listening
Olschlager.
to this probably knows exactly why you can remember that part. Immature.
Yeah, maybe.
And that's Ben Olschlager.
Yeah, pastor up in Lake Orion, Michigan.
You don't get to see his beard today. It's off limits.
Sorry.
The video.
The camera angle on this computer is...
He was slouching.
Garbage. Nope, that's too far. There we go.
We had someone who complimented your camera angle when you were like standing over the camera, and it was very intimidating.
Okay.
Anyway,
I have no clue when that happened. But
the last two episodes.
Last week you said we were going to wrap up this season, and this week we decided, well, first off, we forgot what we were going to talk about today. So what we're actually doing...
We're taking a week to see if we can remember what we were going to talk about.
We felt like it was profound when we were thinking about it.
And for all of you, because I know you're listening, for any of you who are thinking, you guys aren't old enough to do that, my brain leaks sometimes, okay? It has nothing to do with age. I don't know what it has to do with, but it has nothing to do with age.
Yeah. And every day, Josh and I get a little bit old, or a little bit closer in age, percentage-wise.
Yeah, that's true with any person with an age difference.
That's fair. But Josh and I are literally a day apart in age,
which I didn't know until last week's.
I think he knew that at some point in seminary, but he forgot because it felt like useless information.
I didn't process it.
That's fair.
You said June 9th, and I was like, that's a cool day to have a birthday. And I didn't process that that's a day away from my own. None of this is our topic for this is why we forgot the last topic. Because we have a good idea, and then we just spiral into an abyss of chaotic nonsense. Anyway,
today's episode is just a further dive into that abyss of chaotic nonsense. We want to talk about how we'd prefer to have the leader of a denomination chosen. Because, like I said earlier, today was the end of the papal conclave. There was white smoke that came out the chimney. Robert something or other, Previs, I think, is the guy's name, got selected. He's now Pope Leo the 14th. Seems like a decent dude from what I've seen so far, but history can prove me wrong.
The last Pope Leo, fun fact, was the Pope during the Reformation.
And Luther was an Augustinian, which this guy was. So, Lutheran Pope?
Interesting.
Huh.
Probably not. Honestly, probably not. He is a he was a cardinal from Chicago, and he was appointed by the previous pope. So I don't think we're going to get a theologically Lutheran pope, but we can hope, and
One can hope. Creeping closer and closer together. Anyway, there are all sorts of funny things about the fact that this guy's from Chicago. Saw a recent X post, whatever you want to call it. They're no longer called tweets, which is so sad. Recent post on X that said something to the effect of, I bet you that this guy has sworn under his breath while watching Rex Grossman attempt to play quarterback. Yeah. That's a joke for all you Bears fans, which Josh and I are not, but the Bears suck, so deal with it. Might just be for Sean Baker, honestly.
I don't think Sean listens to this podcast. He's been on more than anyone besides us, but I don't think he listens.
Well, if he happens to listen to this episode, hi Sean. Today we want to talk about how we would prefer the leader of the Lutheran Church get chosen, because currently I don't hate the process, but it's also not
it's not the best.
It's not the best. We could do better. So some of these are serious suggestions. Some of these might not be serious suggestions. You can make up your mind on what you think of them. The first one,
well, maybe we should start.
Describe what we do now.
Well, what do we do now? Maybe a little bit of what the Catholic Church does now, since they're kind of the
Well, the first one I was gonna have us walk through is what if our church body did a conclave? Yeah.
And also, for those of you listening who are like, why would I care how the denominational leader is chosen? I think we should probably play by the same rules when we're looking at congregational leadership. So how do we select the congregational president? Which, to be clear, for anyone in one of our congregations, I don't think Ben or I has any intention of rewriting the Constitution and bylaws anytime soon. So,
we do actually. But
never mind. I have no intention of rewriting the Constitution and bylaws soon. So even if I have different ideas, I don't feel strongly enough about them that I'm going to try and change our power structure.
Yep. Anyway, so currently within the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, we have a president. Some people have started calling him a bishop,
which is a little weird.
I don't think it's that weird. I mean,
but it's a little weird.
It's the classic terminology of the church. It's not his official title, but whatever. Honestly, you do you. I don't care.
I mean, it doesn't bother me, but I still think it's a little weird. Because it's not his title.
The heads of a couple of the districts have gone by the title of bishop for most of their history, so I don't know. Anyway, basically, the way that it plays out now is that every congregation in the denomination, in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, gets 2 votes. One from its pastor, if it has a pastor, and one from a lay representative. This is for the presidency.
Everything else, there are fewer representatives. And for anyone who cares enough to be curious, the reason for that is actually, I think, because every member of the synod gets a vote. And you might say, well, I'm a member of the synod. I didn't get a vote. No. Many of you listening are not members of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
Your congregation
are members of congregations of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Because the only members of the synod are congregations and pastors. So congregations and pastors get a vote as part of the synod.
Yeah.
And then,
but it's not quite every member of the synod that has a vote, because if your congregation has multiple pastors...
Right, only one pastor gets the vote.
Yeah. So, in practice, it's probably like 60 to 70% of the synod gets a vote, because there are a lot of congregations that don't have pastors, and there are a lot of congregations that have multiple pastors. So, yeah, I'm throwing that out as a ballpark number. But I don't know what the real number is for sure. And then it's just an online voting process. There's a nomination form that's sent out in advance of the elections. As a congregation, you nominate one person that you think is good. They take the top 5 to 7 people who are qualified to be the president, which I believe you have to be an ordained member of the clergy of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
I think there is a years of experience limiter on there. I
don't know. There might be. I don't remember for sure. But
I mean, Ben and I are not going to get elected.
Yeah.
Whether it's an official rule or not, they're not going to elect someone as young as Ben or myself.
They did with Walther.
Okay, special circumstances. If you're the founder, you get different rules applied.
And if you're that ugly, they just take pity on you. Look up a picture of Walther.
Don't. It's going to break your phone screen.
Possibly. Might make your day.
Make you feel better about yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then it's first past the post, so you got to reach 50% of the vote. However many candidates they start with, I think they just keep eliminating one each time until they have somebody with more than 50% of the vote. Last time, I think it took one round of voting.
I think you're right. I think Harrison had a slim majority right off.
Yeah. But that's pretty much it. Straightforward, relatively simple.
And most everyone listening to this, if not everyone listening to this, we're familiar with this. We live in a representative democracy, so
yeah,
we understand the concept of we vote for the person in charge.
Yeah, that's essentially how our denomination works. Our Lutheran Church Missouri Synod works too,
and that is both synodically, which is the national body, and I believe this is how all the districts function as well.
Yeah, for the most part.
Which is appropriate because for those of you who are in our district convention is well, I think across the denomination, district conventions are this summer. So like in
I think
Texas,
a couple have already happened, but yeah.
yeah. So in Texas, we will be electing a new district president because Mike Newman is retiring, and then next summer is the national convention. So
that's how we do it. I think the biggest things that I see as flaws to this process are that there are pastors in our denomination who shouldn't be pastors, and there are congregations in our denomination that don't hold very tightly to the things that we claim to as a denomination.
Yeah.
And we let them vote anyway.
Well, and I
mean, you can make that claim about any sort of representative democracy.
Right. Well,
that there are people who shouldn't be voting.
Buckle up. I'm about to pick a little bit at representative democracy because there are some problems that tend to come with this kind of system. Because at its core, it becomes a popularity contest.
Yeah.
Which,
in an age with an internet, means you're the best at hot takes.
Yeah. Well, and there's also this reality, because I'm very much like, okay, so why do we need a leader? To be popular is not why you need a leader. To make good decisions, you want a leader. To have conversations with outside entities, this is why you want a leader. Popularity doesn't help with those things. And I think also, I don't know if this is inherent in the practice of democracy. I know it's not, because there are other countries that do it a different way. But it does seem like it almost has a polarizing effect, because you have people, they like try to consolidate their power base. And what you end up with is an us versus them election. Is he talking about American politics? I mean, also, yes, and that's not how we're called to relate to each other.
Yeah.
And I don't think that is productive for the mission of the church, for us to draw lines and say, well, it's this side versus this side. So
Juno agrees. If you can hear the dog,
Juno.
Or see the dog in the background.
Appreciate your backing me up there.
Yeah. Josh, do you remember when Bierman was talking about how he wishes that the United States was a monarchy?
Yes.
He joked in class once that the best form of government is a monarchy, because in a monarchy, generally, everybody likes the king or everybody hates the king. Or at least a pretty substantial majority like the king or hate the king. So it's kind of the people either for or against the leadership. People are pretty united under that. They don't necessarily tend to like fracture too much.
The argument isn't between each other. The argument is us versus the guy on top.
Exactly. Which unifies people a little bit more than you get in representative democracy typically. You can argue whether or not that's a good thing. I generally think it might be. But all of this to say, monarchy? Good thing? Anyway.
There's your hot take. Ben for some sort of office. Juno didn't like that idea at all.
Juno did not like that idea at all.
Don't put that guy in charge. He forgets to feed me sometimes. Juno might be some people's favorite new member of the podcast. So and like Ben, when he was introducing that, it's definitely not the worst way to select. I don't know if it's the best one. Honestly, and this is where I think we can start to jump into the different ways that we could see it happening. Sorry, there's going to be plenty of dog noises for a little while Juno calms down. The first way that we could talk about this is if the Lutheran Church did a conclave, a la the Catholic Church and what they've just finished. So I think the general principle there, you get people that are supposed to know what they're doing, people who are relatively high in the leadership of the church already. I think for our sake, we could pretty neatly say maybe this conclave includes the Council of Presidents. Yeah. And maybe the presidents of the seminaries and of the universities. Yeah. People who have a substantial stake in the work of the denomination. Put them together, and I kind of like the fact that the Catholic Church just puts them in a room, locks the doors, and the only contact they have with the outside world is the nuns that come to feed them. So, like, just get an army of, like, I don't know, 10 to 15 church ladies. I was about to say the LWML. They come marching in with their purple on and yep, make snide comments about how you guys should have made this decision already. What's taking so long?
lock him in a retreat at some tiny church in the middle of the country somewhere where the internet sucks, preferably. And, wait till the sounds of Mighty Fortress come booming out of the sanctuary, and you'll know that we have a new...
Am I correct? The conclave has to be unanimous, right?
It does not. It has to be a 2/3 majority. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
well, and the way you describe that, I think, is a little different from how the Catholic one works, and for a good thing. Because for those, and I might be wrong on this, so someone correct me if I am. The cardinals, who are they're more regional leaders that are selecting the Pope, are appointed by the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a top-down thing, whereas you'd say, okay, so the district presidents, well, how do they get in? And we say, well, maybe you have a sub-conclave for the Texas district, for the Michigan district, whatever. So you have them being lifted. So it's kind of a grassroots kind of thing. So you don't have some of the same weaknesses that if it is kind of just a circle up top. But yeah.
Yeah. I think that would probably be fine. I think the biggest complaints that you would have is largely down to the size of certain districts versus others.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's a complaint that exists now in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, that the Michigan district, which has 300 plus churches and over 100,000 members, Texas district is in a similar boat. A lot of churches, a lot of members, but they have as many presidents as I think the smallest district is the Wyoming district, with like 20 to 30 churches and a couple thousand members.
Yeah.
I could be misrepresenting those numbers, so somebody feel free to check me on that. But there's a pretty substantial difference between the biggest churches and districts in our denomination and the smallest.
Yeah. But I think if you were to do it that way, you might end up with leadership that is at least a little bit more aware of, that is a little bit more in tune with the needs of the church nationally, as opposed to more regional.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Which, for any of you who are listening, like, I don't know if I would go so far as to say that this is gospel truth, but there is at least a feeling on the coastal districts, which is where I have been my whole life. My vicarage was on the coastal district of Florida, Georgia. My first call was coastal. It was California. I'm now in Texas, which is another saltwater district, a coastal district, that are kind of on the outside of the country. And there's a little bit of a feeling of ministry has to look different out here than it does in the Midwest, because the culture is different. And there are definitely times where there are a lot of voices in the saltwater districts that are saying the decisions being made by the synod are not,
they're not beneficial to the
they're
districts
limiting our
on the
ability
outside
to do ministry out here.
Yeah.
Because they're decisions that are very much in line with the culture that they're seeing in the Midwest. So that's a complaint. I think it's at least to some degree justifiable. Like I said, not gospel truth, but I think if you were to do a conclave kind of thing, you might get a little bit more of a national concern from the leadership, because the reality is you're not going to get to a 2/3 unless you have at least some of the saltwater districts on board with the decision.
Yeah, I agree. I think I really like the 2/3 number too, because it pushes you
just for churches.
Yeah,
that's a good number, because I think I forget which of our practical professors would talk about this. When you're in a church, you should never make a decision based on a 51% majority, because that means the church is divided on the decision.
Unless it's inconsequential and you're like voting on carpet color.
Yeah, which is a dumb thing to vote on.
I mean,
an interior designer in, have them look at your space and say, "Hey, this is what's going to look good," and there's your color.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I'm not opposed to that.
Another way you could do it, unless you want to keep talking about the conclave.
No, keep going.
This is your suggestion? Suggestion from earlier, even though it's not a real suggestion at all. We light Ben on fire, and whatever color smoke comes up when the fire reaches his beard, that it'll correspond to one of a few candidates, and the color of the smoke, that's the direction we'll go. We'll have like a gradient of like white to black, and if there's any weird colors, there are a couple candidates out here just in case Ben has some product in his beard that burns funny colors. This I think is the holiest way to do it. Ritual sacrifice.
I'm just gonna ignore that suggestion completely.
Okay, so here's my better one then.
Okay.
When we're talking about leadership, what I have observed, and I might just be a curmudgeonly person, but it looks to me a lot like the bigger a system gets, the more problems it tends to have. Like, I mean, just look at government, for example. Not a ton of people have problems with their local city government. I mean, like you might have a complaint or two, but generally they're pretty in touch with what's going on, and they're just trying to make the city. And the decisions they make are evident of that. And when you get up to the state level, people are like, the feelings tend to be a little more split. And you get to the national level, and the feelings are very much split. And I've seen so many institutions that I'm like, the problem is, at least as far as I can tell, that the leadership is so far removed from the people they're leading that they can't lead effectively. So my solution to this is not to have a national leader. Now, there are some functions that maybe you want to, like you say, well, we want to make sure that that there's education going, that the seminaries are operating as they should, and that we have these opportunities for the entire denomination to get together and to talk about things and to make decisions and learn and whatever else. It was like, I would say, great. Get a few volunteers every cycle to say, we're going to organize this. That might get touchy with the seminary thing, but like it just occurs to me as like, I don't know that we need this figure up top as much. So I would leave the leadership up to a more localized thing. So just, I guess, burn the whole thing down is my more serious solution. But I'm serious. And you look at Israel. When biblical Israel was early in their experience of being God's people, they didn't have a king. They had faithful prophets who would help guide the nation, and they had these judges or prophets in different roles, but they didn't have like this centralized system. I guess you could kind of call it a monarchy because you had Abraham was in charge, so you had this single ruler, but he wasn't so much a ruler as he was a mouthpiece. And Israel gets in a lot of trouble when they say, we want a king like everybody else. Maybe we say, we don't need one person in charge. We're going to be as faithful as we can. We're going to trust that God is going to make sure things are landing where they need to. No one's going to listen to my idea. No one who cares is going to implement that idea. But it's kind of just like, let's keep it more casual.
I don't hate that idea. I mean, that's kind of how the early church operated. There was a bishop at the head of each city, and those bishops would get together when need be to make decisions, but there wasn't necessarily a bishop over the bishops.
Yeah. And I think that could work.
I think there's a possibility of that, yeah. Juno's back.
Hi, Juno. Now, it's the same thing. I have every time college football rolls around again, I have my complaints about the conferences work and how the bowl system is just too chaotic, and the people that get to go play in the national championship are just, it feels like there are a few old guys in a room, and they were just like, those ones, sure. And I always have these complaints about a different system, and my comment afterward is always, but there's too much invested in the current system for it to ever be changed that significantly. The same thing is true here.
Yeah.
It might be a great idea to switch to we don't necessarily have a unified national leader, but we have some local ones. Might be a great idea. It wouldn't have any problems.
If we do switch to that,
no one's going to ask.
Can we start calling this is kind of the system that the Orthodox churches have. They do have a first among equals kind of situation where they consider the Patriarch of Constantinople. And yes, they still call it that because
they're the Orthodox.
To paraphrase Luther, screw the Turks. If you've read enough Luther, you know what I mean. But yeah, so they consider the Patriarch of Constantinople to be the first among equals. So basically, like, when you have a conversation amongst the patriarchs, which is what they call the heads of their different kind of organizational churches, his voice tends to get the most weight, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he's in charge.
Right. Well, and this is true even in a group of friends. Like if you're talking, you're asking people for advice, all your friends, you're listening to all of them. There's one of them that you probably are like really taking maybe a little more seriously than everybody else. But at the end of the day,
yeah. Like if you fell down a flight of stairs and your wrist looks a little funny, and your friends are like trying to give you advice, and one of them happens to be a doctor, you'll probably listen to that one more.
I hope so.
I don't hate that system. As long as, like I was about to say, when we elect district presidents, we no longer call them district presidents. We call them patriarchs.
Pretty cool.
Because, like, the Lutheran Patriarch of Ann Arbor, instead of the district president of the Michigan district, I think is a way more boss title.
Yeah. I would also be open to titles such as Forerunner. It's the Forerunner of the Texas district. It's a little bit of Halo vibe for you.
All right.
Champion. No, that's not as good. Patriarch is better than Champion.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So that's Josh's suggestion. Here's my suggestion. And this is based on how a church body actually selects its leader. I think we should just copy the Coptic Church, who has, I think, the greatest selection process. They call their leader the Coptic Pope, but they have like the greatest selection process for the Coptic Pope. So they have a conclave, but out of the conclave, it's the bishops of the many regional churches in Egypt and around the world that are part of the Coptic Church. They get together and they select 3 from among their number who they think are the noblest, the wisest, the most godly, that would be good leaders for their church body. And I believe that those names need to be, they take those 3 names, they write them on, I believe, wooden balls, put those wooden balls in a box, close the box, and then have a child reach into the box and draw one name. So they do the most biblical thing, and there's all sorts of prayer that happens along the way in this process, just so you know. But I think this is the most biblical way to do this possible, because they cast lots, essentially, for their pope.
I really like that. Well, and you as you listen to it, you're just leaving it up to chance?
No, we're leaving it up to God.
And I think there is some part of us that wants control, that says, no, we need to, I can get on board with that.
I'm bringing this, the more I think about this, and be ready, Good Shepherd, I'm bringing this to the people. I'm going to ask them about it.
How do you choose your congregational president?
We cast lots. Yeah, God chooses. We don't.
Well, and you're kind of this is something I was thinking about as we were talking about this episode before we were recording. Because ultimately, who do you want leading? You want the person who is the most faithful. And it's really hard to discern that, especially because the most faithful person is not going to necessarily be super well known, because part of faithfulness is humility. So and there's going to be one of the pastors in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod is the most faithful pastor. And this is a mathematical reality. Someone is the most faithful. Don't know who it is, but someone is. Might be Sean Baker. Gonna have to tell me this episode. That's too.
I would put a strong argument in for Ryan Mazer, though.
Oh, that's another good one. But because they're going to be humble and they're just doing their pastor thing, they're not going to be really well known. So the popular vote doesn't really work to find your most faithful person. And if you just say, well, some people in charge who maybe have a more general awareness, like a conclave kind of thing, if you're looking for the most faithful person, you might find them, but there's a lot of room in there for different opinions of what faithfulness looks like.
Yeah.
So they're faithful to the truth, or they're faithful to your particular application of the truth? But then this idea of, well, you go around and you get some pretty unanimous names together of this is a really faithful guy, and then you cast lots for it and put it in God's hands. That might be the best we can do, especially on a scale. The LCMS has roughly 1,500,000 members. It's under that, but ballpark. Like, that's a big system. You can't just go down the line and start asking people. And you can't quantify faithfulness. It's a very ephemeral concept. You can give everybody a theology exam, but just because you know the right answers doesn't mean you live them out. So, yeah, I'm on board with it. Cast lots.
Yeah.
But not for their clothes. That would not be the move.
No, but so worth me noting, I believe that they take this from after Jesus' ascension.
Selection of Matthias, I think?
Yeah, Matthias.
His name?
After Jesus' ascension at the end of Acts 1, the disciples are looking to replace Judas in their number. And they pick two guys. I can't remember the other guy's name. One's named Matthias. He's the one that ends up getting chosen. And they have some qualifications that they need to meet. They're considered followers of Jesus. They followed him from day one. They were faithful to him to the end and are considered,
Joseph
good candidates.
Barsabbas.
Joseph, there you go.
It's in Acts 1 for anyone who's wanting to look at it.
So basically, they have a couple of really good candidates that they find from among their number. And they're like, well, how do we choose? Let's let God choose. So they cast lots, which is, depending on how they did it, likely a game that includes carved animal knuckles that are kind of fashioned in the form of dice, which would somehow indicate if
it totals to over 6, it's Matthias. If it totals to under 6, it's Joseph.
Yeah, it's hard to tell exactly how they cast the lots, but yeah, could be.
So what we could do, we could put together a list of qualifications, ordained. You could throw years of experience on there. You could put a couple personal qualifications on there. I mean, you could just list out what it says in Timothy: husband of one wife, kids are in the faith. Like you have this list. You narrow it down. The guys who fill those qualifications, you cast lots. And if you're like, that's too many guys, then you add more qualifications.
Well, honestly, you could take the guys that you have from that group, bring all of those names to like the Council of Presidents. Like I said earlier, chuck them in the sanctuary at a rural church in, I don't know, we can go back to Brown County, Missouri, where the LCMS was founded. Chuck them in one of the churches down there, turn the internet off.
Old-timey boat all the way back before they landed. You don't get to come back. You don't get to come back to land until you make a decision.
You know that one of the boats sank, right?
Well, it was the will of our Heavenly Father, Ben.
Anyway, I'd say just chuck them in one of the churches down in Brown County.
Oh.
Turn off the internet and make them talk it out. Come up with 3 names from the list of qualified candidates, and then I don't know who draws. Maybe the head of the LWML.
Random kid on the street.
The first kid baptized closest to 10 years prior to the conclave.
Sure.
I don't know.
Cast lots for the kid that's going to draw lots for the conclave. Perfect.
This is getting too complicated. We need a
flow chart for this.
Honestly,
just structure that no one's ever going to implement.
Just go to the woods at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. Find the first kid you come across.
First kid running that you can't see their parent anywhere near.
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
the kid who draws lots.
Exactly. It's like when Jesus tells the disciples, go find the house with the donkey tied out front. Just go walk the woods till you find a kid sitting on the steps outside, and that's the kid that draws the ceremonial lot for synodical president or grand patriarch of St. Louis. Yeah.
Yep. Well, and to kind of maybe wrap a bow on this, most of you listening to this are never going to vote for synodical president. You might be a pastor listening. You will vote. You might end up maybe you're going to be a lay delegate at some point in your life, and then you'd vote. None of us are going to restructure the leadership of the LCMS. I feel pretty safe in that.
It seems like a reasonable assumption.
But I think what we can still take away from this is when we are considering leaders in our churches, in the government, in the district, in the Senate, when we have that opportunity, our focus first and foremost should be how faithful are they. And while we're not using any of these wacky ways to figure that out, I think that should be first and foremost our consideration. Mm-hmm. Is this person going to faithfully lead? is this person going to be in line with God's will? So when you're thinking about who's going to step up to lead in a congregation, like that should be the concern. Is this person going to help the congregation live out the mission that God gave us? So, yeah. Ready for some empty netters?
Sure.
Hameen?
Sure. I think my empty netter is, don't be afraid to cast lots. Leave things up to chance, but you're actually leaving them up to God.
Yeah.
Like, be willing to do.
That's a good one. Just kidding. This whole podcast has just been about letting dice make your life decisions. Man, my takeaway is nothing as clever as that. It's just look for faithful people to lead in your life, whether that's in organizations or whatever else, in your family. Look to faithful people to lead. That's what matters. With that, brothers and sisters, we will try and remember what we were supposed to talk about today.
Next week. Go
in peace. Serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thank you for listening in to this episode of Cross-Checking, a ministry of Hope and Good Shepherd Lutheran Churches, where we strive to deepen your understanding of the faith and help apply it to daily life. If this podcast is helpful to you, rate the podcast, subscribe to us on your favorite platform, and share it with others who might also gain something from it.